Serious, Redditors who were almost murdered, what's your story? I was working at a gas station. It was at night and slow. So I was sitting in the office watching TV. All of a sudden, one guy comes in behind me. Another guy comes in front of me. Guy in front says don't get up. I give him the wad of cash from my breast pocket. And then the money from my front pocket. They rush out back into the darkness. I stay put. Just like the guy said. Then I call the owner. A car pulls up to get gas. I tell them they need to pay by credit card or exact change because I just got robbed. Then I reach up to touch my neck. It was bloody. The guy in back was holding a knife to my throat. The last time I saw my ex, I broke up with him while we sat in his car at a park. After choking me until I passed out, he got onto the freeway and drove 100 plus mph while slamming my head into the window and dashboard. I was able to get to the car at one point when he got off the freeway and ran into the street screaming. Trying to wave down a car but no one stopped. He was forcing me into his trunk when a man pulled over and started filming him and I ran onto a bus. I won't ever forget how his eyes looked and that he was absolutely silent the whole 2 hours. I moved across the country after his mom called me panicking to warn me he was looking for me. This is my aunt's story but it's too good to not share. My aunt was almost killed by the famous serial killer Michael Swango. The killer doctor. She worked as a unit secretary at the ward he worked in regularly and they knew each other well. Part of his routine was poisoning people he worked with and he admitted, after he was caught, he was planning on killing her but his co-workers got suspicious of him and he left town before he had the chance. I've told this before but I witnessed a murder directly in front of me while I was sitting in my Jeep with the top down. Two guys were arguing on the sidewalk. I was just sitting there. They knew I was there and didn't care. One guy pulled out a homemade shank from his pant leg and straight armed it into the other guy's eye. I will never forget the crunching sound when that blade went into his face. The murderer looked at me once and bolted. I ran up to help but the guy was FK'd. Blood spouting out of his eye and gushes and he was moaning horribly. He died as the ambulance arrived. I was the only witness and nearly testified in court but the guy pleaded guilty and got 15-25 years. Still have nightmares about that 25 years later. I saw a fatal car accident that FK'd me up pretty good. I sought out something called EMDR, which blurred the images in my brain a little bit so they aren't as graphic. It only took one session with a qualified therapist and definitely helps me sleep better. Just something to consider. I was a kid on a trip with my family and the hired driver had a mental breakdown and tried driving us off a bridge. My ex-stepfather is bipolar. After my mom left him, he had another manic episode. He broke in and pulled a gun on us. Told me to go to my room and not to call the police. I was 11. I called the police. When they pulled up he shot through the door to my bedroom and emptied the clip. I had already grabbed my cat and was outside under the deck. I'm just glad he shot the door and not my mom. My 1/2 sister was born later that year. At her funeral he showed up and kept trying to talk to me. He couldn't understand why I refused. He was never charged and has no memory of the incident. He spent a weekend at a mental hospital and then was released to go to work. As a teacher, I don't understand how all this was ignored and he was considered an upstanding teacher and person. I posted this story before on another thread once. But here goes. When I was in high school, a random new kid started stalking me. Like following me home from school. I'd see him outside my house. He'd stand by my locker at school. He was weird. Told my counselor but they didn't really believe me. Told a teacher I was close with and he talked to the principal. They said they'd watch out. After about a week my boyfriend was pissed the school wasn't helping me. He confronted this kid and they almost physically fought. Finally, he got kicked out of school and about a month later, less than 3 miles from my house, he strangled a girl my age, who also went to my school, and dumped her body in a field. My brother struggled with mental health issues his entire life. When I was really young he pushed me into the deep end of the pool knowing I couldn't swim and walked away. They found me floating face down in the pool shortly after and had to resuscitate me. Years later he took his own life. Mental health issues are not to be ignored. My ex and I got into an argument because he had become abusive and I told him I was going to tell his family what he'd been doing. He got so angry at that he tried to grab me but I ran out of the room. He headed for the gun closet so went outside to make sure when he killed me, the neighbors would see it. I called 911 outside and for some lucky reason they were just blocks away. When they got there he was in the middle of loading the Remy 700. I pressed charges and he only got 1 night in jail. His dad bailed him out and despite me getting a 5-year restraining order, I'd run into him around town. He pleaded no contest and got 3 years probation. That's it. I moved 3,000 miles away but I still fear him. I was about 18. Female. And just moved to the city for university. Driving near downtown and I see police lights behind me. I pulled over and a man in plain clothes gets out of an unmarked car and when he is close to my window I see another man getting out the passenger side also in plain clothes walking up to the other side of my car. I freaked and floored it out of there. I think I ran over their foot then I went the wrong way down several one-way streets and ended up driving an hour away in one direction cause I was afraid they would follow me. I called the police to make sure they hadn't actually pulled me over. Which they hadn't. They never found the guys. Came home. Went into kitchen from garage. Saw all my stereo equipment. This was 1982. Stacked by front door. Burglar shot me twice in the back as I was practically next to me when I walked in but never saw him so then took off. Not much more to say. A mentally ill kid in my school stalked me for a week and made plans to kill me. He said it was cause I made fun of him. Turns out he thought I was someone else. So there's that. The teacher said the video footage was creepy. I'd be walking down the halls and he was behind me. Just staring. His plan was to put a shank in my neck. Teacher caught him before he stabbed me and I remember the kid left in police cuffs. About 10 years ago 5 men I've never met before decided to beat the living shit out of me. I tried to run. When there was nowhere to go I tried to defend myself and was knocked out cold pretty fast. I'm pretty sure they thought I was dead because when I was noticed I was still passed out, don't know for how long. Turns out my former friend's wife thought her husband was paying a bit too much attention to me and decided to give some guys booze in exchange for taking care of me. I don't know if this counts as an almost because you never know how far your abuser was willing to go. But when I was a kid, I pissed my dad off and he started strangling me. Like, really strangling me. I don't know what made him eventually stop. But I'm glad to be alive and okay. I even thought it was my fault for years. But there's no excuse for a grown man to try to strangle an 11-year-old girl to death because she wouldn't stop whining about a toy she wanted. Not mine. And I never asked for many details. But my mom told me a few years ago that when she was in her late teens, she was abducted by a man in his car. She didn't stop fighting. And he let her out. And she told her parents what happened. They thought she made the story up because she was out past her curfew. Nothing ever came of it for the man. I remember thinking she was weird when I was growing up because she was always checking to make sure no one was hiding in her car. And was always on high alert for any strange sounds at home. I was getting screamed at by my ex. As usual. I don't remember what I said but he grabbed my arm and pulled me off the couch. He started hitting me, not the first time. I'd never seen him so angry. And I'd long since taught myself to not react and give him the feeling of having power over me. If I didn't cry he would get bored and stop eventually. Next thing I know he pushes me up against the wall and wraps his hand around my throat. I was having a hard time breathing. But I still wouldn't cry. Just as I was about to pass out, I gathered all my strength and punched him in the ribs as hard as I could. He dropped me and before I could catch my breath, I hit him in the balls. When he was down, I kicked him in the ribs a couple times and locked myself in the bathroom until he came and started his usual apologies. I knew I needed to get out, and 2 weeks later, I did. It's been 8 years. TLDR. Mom's ex-boyfriend couldn't deal being without her. Showed up with a gun. Cops called. First cop that responded got in a fight with him and he killed that cop outside our apartment. Tried to get in our apartment but couldn't because he was severely wounded by that said cop. SWAT showed up. Blew his brains out outside the front door. I've had severe anxiety since I was 6. Worked at a shop in a bad part of town. One of the guys working there messed around with some gangbangers girl. Dude shot up the place in broad daylight. No one got hit though. I was in an abusive relationship that I couldn't find a way out of. I had done something to upset him. I think he didn't like the shoes I was wearing that day. So he tried to throw me out of the 3rd story window. Luckily his roommate stepped in when he heard the glass break. It was the one and only time he did anything. But I think I would have died that night if not for him. I was pretty cut up but I didn't splat. I intervened in a fight between my parents that would have resulted in a homicide anyway. Had the gun turned on me and held to my forehead. I said pull the trigger Piglet because that's the first thing that came to idiotic. Depressed 17-year-old me's brain. It de-escalated the situation enough for the gun to be removed from the fight. Once when I was 12. My parents and I were on a hike. We were almost back to the car. And there was a drop off to the left. All of a sudden, a bullet whizzed literally right by my head. It was close enough that I could hear it going by my ear. Several more bullets came by. We had to duck and run the remaining quarter mile. Turns out some dumb military kids posted their targets above their heads pointing up to a hiking trail. It was technically an emergency access road. But local folks used it to hike on frequently. To the point you couldn't hike it without running into at least one other group. I've never seen my dad yell at someone like he yelled at them. Last time I talked about this on Reddit. People accused me of making it up, so I hesitate to talk about it again, but it actually feels good to get it out, so I'll give it another try. I'm not spending time on the details this time around. In sum, my roommate drugged me and almost killed me, but he actually didn't want me dead and helped keep me alive. I didn't know I was drugged then. And thought I was very sick and that he was an awesome roommate for spoon feeding me when I was unable to move, etc. Then he began acting weird. I got very weird vibes and I moved out in the middle of the night, skipped a lot of details. He is now serving 30 years in prison for drugging, upping, and videotaping his victims. Some of the victims are still missing. I was in one of his videos and had no memory of it, but that's how I knew he drugged me too much and I wasn't just very sick. When I was 12 years old, a few bullies at my school jumped me while I was walking home. We had issues previously, so I had it coming for a long time. They broke my right arm and several ribs. I was in the hospital for several weeks after. They ended up getting arrested for attempted murder. They even admitted that they were trying to get rid of me. I'm still undergoing therapy and refuse to walk alone without a form of self-defense. I've told this before, but when I was a kid, probably around 2nd grade, our house got robbed and my mom and I came home while it was in progress. For whatever reason, she decided to go in and interrupt them. She grabbed her gun, didn't shoot, yelled at them to get the FCK out of my house, and then we drove off in a hurry to the corner store to call the cops. This was before cell phones. Less than 2 weeks later, my mom and I are sitting in the living room on the couch, our backs to the front door. Someone drives by and fires about 6 or 8 shots into the front of our house. Thank God for a steel front door. The cops came and said they didn't think the 2 incidents were related. Well, those cops were dumbasses then. Listen to a local urban legend. Teenage me and my 2 friends went to hang out at a big local park. The rumor was that the street across from the park driveway had a haunted house at the end. We decided to investigate. The little street ended at a straight driveway covered by trees overhead. We pull in the end and start to look around. Then, A dude in full clan robes with what looked like a big shotgun starts from the other end of the driveway. Walking with real purpose. Fastest 20.10 I've ever done. Found out in some local online boards later than the local clan used that abandoned house as a beating place. And that guy was probably the guard lookout. I was in a very rural town in Mexico for work. They were having a local holiday. And part of it was these guys lighting off hundreds of these really cool homemade rockets. I was very drunk. And I kept offering money to buy one so I could light one off. I was being extremely belligerent. After an hour of harassing them, my boss told me I would be fired if I did it again. And made me go to f***ing bed right now. Or it was my ass. Turns out they told my boss they were connected. They didn't need my f***ing money. And if that f***ing idiot came out one more time, they would bury him that night. My boss explained that he would pass it on. Boss told me about it when I sobered up. I told my boss that they were right. And that I was being disrespectful. And he said he would apologize for me. He did so. And told me it was safe to go out. And when I did have to go out, I kept my f***ing eyes on the ground when those guys were near. Walking down the sidewalk in Akron, Ohio City with a couple friends. We were at some college parties and on the way back home. Nobody was around except for this one guy on the sidewalk. But it's the city so that's not unusual. We get closer and all of a sudden my friends book it. Like full speed. Into some bushes and cut into someone's yard. I'm like WTF. What are you guys doing over there? From behind a bush they start whispering frantically, get over here. Now. I walk over casually, I'm like, what's up guys? They pointed at the guy who was standing on the sidewalk not 5 feet from where I was a second ago. Then I see it. The guy had a ski mask covering his head. It was dark and I was drunk and he was black so I didn't see it before. And he had an AR-15 holding vertically to his body to conceal it. He was standing there like scoping out some house across the street. Like he was about to do something super evil. I literally almost bumped into that guy. My ex tried to strangle me because I said no to sex. He's now in the Marine Corps so. A long time ago. A dude asked me for a cigarette while you was walking home from work late at night. I was feeling generous so I stopped to give home one. Then his buddy pulled out a pistol, old Beretta 32 or 380, and asked for my wallet. I wasn't about doing that because I was poor, had no car and getting a new ID would be a pain so I offered my cash instead, all $12 of it. He was pissed but took it. He then told me I had better run. Being young and cocky and unafraid for whatever reason I casually walked away. He didn't like that much so when I was about 20 feet away he popped off 3 or 4 rounds at my back. I started to run then. I actually got all the way home, 10 blocks or so, without incident, but when I did my girlfriend pointed out that I was bleeding. I hadn't noticed. I had been grazed on my neck and had a small chunk missing from my ear. An inch or so to the left and I would have likely died. I met a guy who went to school with my sister so I didn't feel like I needed to worry too much about him. However, he got very weird after 3 dates. Like asking if I'd be friends with his ex. Would he mind if he kept her nude pic on his computer screen? Etc. I ended it quick and felt creeped out. He went into a depression and I promised to help him set up a profile on a dating site to just get rid of him. A year later he texted me and thanked me. Said that he'd gotten engaged. 6 months later it's all over the news. His new wife didn't feel safe around him so she'd locked him out of their newly bought house. He broke in and shot her. Then took the gun to his head. They both died. I almost feel like I killed that woman since I started his dating profile and I feel bad about being thankful it wasn't me. Happened 12 years ago and it still haunts me. Please do not blame yourself. You had nothing to do with this. He was always the problem.